Hi, this is Greg with HVAC Solutions. What that means is basically I'm with Temperature Equipment Corporation and the National Excelsior Corporation. Today we're going to talk about indoor air quality for residential systems. And if you have a question, please type it in the questions section on your computer. I'll do my best to answer all the questions during the presentation. But if I can't get to them all, I will respond individually after the presentation. So what I'll say, the agenda for today is to talk about the need for indoor air quality and the opportunity in solutions within that, and hopefully that leads to a little bit of profit. I'm going to focus on filtration and air purifiers for this presentation. If I start at the beginning, what is indoor air quality? I can usually put indoor air quality problems into one of three buckets. And those buckets are particulate, microbial, and gases. And I always try to remember them by PMG. Particulate, microbial, and gases. If you can figure out what problem you're dealing with, it makes it much easier to find a solution. So what is a particulate? Particulate is that dust, dander, pollen. Generally, I like to say that particulate are the things that will make you sneeze. Not always the case, but it's an easy way to remember that dust, dander, pollen are particulates, and they generally make you sneeze. The second bucket is microbials. Now, microbials are the things that can make you sick. So these are generally single-cell living organisms that get into your body and make you sick. Gases. Gases are smog, odors, things of that nature. Generally, you can't see gases, but what I like to say is that you can generally smell gases. Now, I say generally because being in the HVAC industry, we know that there are gases you can't smell, harmful gases. Carbon monoxide comes to mind. One of the, I'll say, notorious gases are VOCs. And VOCs, VOC stands for volatile organic compounds. VOCs are a gas, and a lot of times you can smell them, but occasionally you can't. So what do VOCs do? If you take a look at this list, I mean, it sounds like you're not feeling that good. So VOCs can, I'll say, almost make you feel sick. The problem with VOCs is that they're found everywhere. So if you take a look around, VOCs are in the carpet you're standing on, it's in the paint on the walls, it's in the ceiling tiles, it's at the desk you're sitting at. It's almost impossible to get away from VOCs. So what VOCs do, like I said before, instead of headache, dizziness, I mean, we're starting to talk about coughing, wheezing. It really does sound like you're feeling sick. If I take it a step further, long exposure to VOCs can start causing things like, sinus infection, strep throat, respiratory infections. So it can make somebody feel really sick, hospital sick. We talk about IAQ in general. How many people have allergies and asthma? As you can see here, there's a lot of kids, a lot of Americans. But the reality is there anybody out there who doesn't either have an allergy or asthma, or do you know somebody who has allergies or asthma? And almost all the time, everybody knows somebody who has allergies and asthma or asthma if they don't have it themselves. So the reality is we're looking at people. So where I used to say the opportunity was, people with allergies, people with asthma, well, that's a great target audience. The real prospect is people. And why do I say that? Because even if you don't have allergies or asthma, people still don't want to get sick. Not only is it a pain in the butt, but it costs a lot of money. And then, you spread it. So other people get sick. Kids get sick. The wife gets sick. So it's not just, a few days off of work. It's all the costs involved from not feeling good. So if I take a long story and make it, short, bad stuff is in the home. If we're not doing something to protect ourselves, our lungs become the filter. So all that bad stuff in the air, if we're not doing something to get rid of it, our lungs have to do the work instead. So if I jump into filtration, there's a lot of different terms and a lot of different types of filters involved. You see here, media air cleaners, electronic air cleaners, electrostatic air cleaners, then some different terminology, and we're going to talk about that. The first thing, or I'll say probably one of the most common filters, is a media air cleaner. Come in various sizes. The nice thing is they're not that expensive. They're easy to replace. They do a good job at getting rid of what I'll call the big stuff. The big stuff is like pollen, some of the dust, I'll say dust bunnies. So it does a good job at that, but the one thing that we forget is that it does a great job at protecting the equipment. It's so many more times effective than a standard 1-inch filter. The problem with media air cleaners is that you can go into any big box store and pick up a media air cleaner to fit in that cabinet. And there's a lot of competitors out there. It's extremely hard to differentiate one media air cleaner from the next. If we jump into electronic air cleaners, now we're starting to deal with smaller particles. So they're more efficient than most of the media air cleaners out there. They're thinner, so they can fit in a lot more places. Problem with electronic air cleaners is that they have to be maintained. And I'll say that they have to be maintained almost quarterly. If they're not, they lose efficiency. And if they lose efficiency, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And they've been around for a long time, so it's older technology. It hasn't changed a whole lot. So we look at this graph here. The story between media air cleaners and electronic air cleaners has always been that electronic air cleaners start off much more efficient. They catch the smaller particles. But over time, they lose efficiency, and they're not catching as much as they once did. Media air cleaners, on the other hand, start off less efficient, but as they get loaded up, they catch more particulate. And media air cleaners and electronic air cleaners, those paths will always cross at some point. So which one do you sell? It's really up to you, but electronic air cleaners start efficient and then lose efficiency. Media air cleaners start less efficient but then gain efficiency. New technology. So what various companies have done is kind of taken the best of both worlds. So they've taken an electronic air cleaner and added a media air cleaner to it. So what that does, it gives us an air cleaner that starts very efficient, a lot of times higher than the normal electronic air cleaners. But as it gets dirty, it gets more efficient. Now, eventually, you're going to have to change it, otherwise the furnace is going to go up. But the beauty is you do change it, and it starts right back at the same spot it started, generally in those 90% efficiency ranges. The other thing is, once it captures, and I'm not going to use particulate here, but let's say it captures something smaller, like a virus, it will actually kill the virus. So a lot of times I get challenged, what's the difference between killing a virus or permanently capturing a virus? Well, it's subtle, but when you go to change that filter, if it's dead, it's not going to harm you. If it's still alive, it can do damage. That's kind of the breakdown I give it. Some other terminology for filters is HEPA. Stands for High Efficiency Particulate Air Filter. Some people call it a arrestor, depending on which agency you're looking at. But what it means is that that filter has to be 99.97% effective at catching 0.3 microns. If you don't catch 99.97% of 0.3 microns, you're not a HEPA filter. Now, these filters are so absolute, meaning we're taking so much stuff out of the air, that there usually have to be a bypass. So we're not taking 100% of the air. Maybe we're taking 10, 20, 30% of the air, depending on the size. The one thing I do want to talk about real quick is that there's a filter called HEPA type. Now, HEPA type means you utilize all the principles of filtration, but you don't hit 99.97% at 0.3 microns. So you're not quite a HEPA, but you use the principles, so they're able to be called HEPA type. So just be aware that there are some of those out there. Electrostatic filters. The great thing about these is that they're easy to install. They're generally 1 inch. They do come in some 2-inch flavors. Usually they're 24 volt. Much more efficient than a standard 1-inch filter. But watch the claims. That's all I'm saying on that. MERV. So this stands for Minimum Efficiency Rating Value. Residentially, this is a number scale, somewhere between 1 and 16. The beautiful thing about this is that it puts all filters, all residential filters, into a category. It gives them a number. And it's actually difficult to explain this without going, back in time. So if we go back in time, ASHRAE had 2 different tests. First one was the efficiency test. And the efficiency test took, atmospheric air that you're breathing right now, ran it through some ductwork and through a filter. And if that filter took out 20% of the bad stuff in the air that you're breathing, it was a 20% efficient filter. Well, ASHRAE also had the arrestance test. And the arrestance test took this carbon dust. I call it, black, gunky, used coffee grinds. They run it through that same ductwork. And that filter now catches 80% of black coffee grinds. So that's an 80% efficient filter. Well, when you put both of those filters on a shelf, do you want the 20% efficient filter or the 80% efficient filter? Well, the problem is everybody wanted the 80% efficient filter when the better filter was 20% efficient, but it was taking 20% of stuff you could not see versus 80% of coffee grinds. So because of those issues, ASHRAE said, well, we're going to put everybody on the same level. We're not going to have 2 tests. We're going to have 1 test. And we're going to give them a number based on how efficient they are. And it's a great idea. I'd say two small issues with it is that, first, you cannot test electronic air cleaners. You can't test them because they use a carbon-based dust, and carbon tends to short out electronic air cleaners. The second thing is that they don't account for static. So what does that mean? That means I can have a piece of cardboard that is clearly 100% efficient. It's going to be a MERV 16, but you can't really use it in any normal application. Why? Because you can't get air through it, so it doesn't do us any good. Some other tests out there, I'll say new, it's probably 5-6 years now, clean air delivery rate, the CADR. What I want to point out about this is that AHAM does the testing. So AHAM is the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers. So these guys spend a lot of time testing things like portable dehumidifiers, portable air cleaners. So when they give you statements like, 8 times more effective than a room HEPA filter, sounds great, but the reality is any whole house, anything is going to be better than a very efficient room filter. So just be aware of some of the claims on that one. If I start looking at the principles of filtration and how it works, the first one's probably the easiest to explain. It's called straining. So if you ever made pasta at home, you throw the pasta in the strainer, right? The noodles stay, but the water filters out. It's the same idea. We're dealing with a large particulate. The air can go through the filter, but the large particulate can't. It gets stuck. So it's kind of like the pasta noodles. It's just too big to make it through that filter. So that's straining. The second one is impaction. This is the one I like to call the head-on collision. So air is moving pretty fast through that ductwork, and this particulate is moving pretty fast as well, and it runs right into that filter. So head-on collision. Interception. This one's, I'd say, just like a football game. You're dealing with a smaller particulate now, one that could get through that filter. But as it goes through, it may catch on something else and get dragged into the filter material. So it gets stuck there, kind of picked off, if you will. Diffusion. Now, this is the hardest principle to explain. We're starting to deal with extremely small particulate, one that could easily make it through the filter. But as that filter hits the, I'll say the bottom of that return air drop, there's a lot of turbulence created as the air tries to make that turn. So a particulate this small might actually make it through the filter, but because of all the turbulence, it kind of comes back around and gets caught maybe even on the back side of the filter. And that's diffusion. One of the newest principles is electrostatic. So what this does, it takes those 4 principles and makes them more effective, because the particulate is charged and then the filter is oppositely charged. So as the particulate comes through, it may have made it through, but it's attracted to the filter, and it makes those 4 other principles more effective. I'm talking a lot about different size particulate, and we usually use microns to describe the size, and we're dealing with extremely small particulate here. To give you an idea, on the back of a postage stamp, you can fit over 25,000 microns on the back of a postage stamp. So, think about that next time you're licking a postage stamp. Do we lick postage stamps anymore? I think they're all stickers these days. A few other concepts that we don't talk about very often is depth loading. So depth loading, if you ever took out a 1-inch filter and the side of the return is dirty, but the side of the furnace is clean, that is not depth loading. That's a face loading filter. Catches everything on the front end and anything that goes past, it's going to make its way to the coil or back into the air. So depth loading would mean that it starts on the side of the furnace, fills up all the way to the back of the side of the return. TFP, this stands for Turbulent Flow Precipitator. So what that means is basically if I can change the direction of airflow, I can make a filter more efficient. So if you think of a particulate is moving straight, in a straight line, and it hits a brick wall, it then has to go down and around. And we have therefore slowed down the particulate, and we make it easier to capture. And that is a concept that some filter manufacturers will utilize to up their MERV ratings, or even get to a HEPA type standard. Zapping, I use this to describe the old electronic air cleaners. Sometimes you bang on that return and you hear a little snap, crackle, pop. That's basically a little bit of arcing. Some people love it because they know that something's working, it's making some noise. Problem with it, it creates a little bit of ozone, which again, some people love the smell, they know it's working, and other people can't stand it. Settling. Settling is the idea that the smaller the particulate, the longer it's going to stay in the air. So if you look at a micron that's one micron, or a particulate that's 1 micron in size, that thing may never hit the ground. But you look at a particulate that's 10 microns in size, after about 5 minutes, that thing's hitting the ground. And the point is, an air cleaner is not going to do anything for those, larger size particulate. That would be called a vacuum. So if it's going to hit the ground, the blower is just not powerful enough to pick a particulate off the ground and suck it through the return and into a filter. Not going to happen. All right, so this is kind of the State of the Union. And the State of the Union is that less than 1 out of 10 furnaces gets a whole house air cleaner. So awful lot of 1-inch filters going out there. And I think we could all agree that people could use a good filter, if nothing else, to protect the equipment. Problem is, people want cleaner air. We know that because millions of portable air cleaners get sold every year. And they sell more every year than they do the previous year. HVAC industry pretty much stays flat. We never really grow. So the problem there is that people don't know where to get it. They want it, they don't know where to get it. So where do they go? They go to big box stores, they go to Walgreens. What they know is that little Johnny is sick, and oh, there's an air cleaner on the shelf I can pick up. I'll help them out. So they make it simple. You start looking at the aisles in big box stores. There's a whole aisle dedicated to filters. Think it's by accident? No, it's not. You look at certain stores at the beginning of the fall season. They'll have pyramids of filters in that front aisle so you can grab them as you go by. Portable air cleaners. I hear a lot of people say, oh, they're so cheap, we can't compete with it. The reality is they're not that cheap. $600 to take care of one room, plus you're paying shipping. Or in certain cases, maybe you get it free. Or you buy more, you get a discount. But still, $600 to clean one room, for maybe double that, you do the whole house. And we've all heard the story about Ionic Breeze and the story with them, but because there's so much money there, there's so much money to be made, the brand is trying to make a comeback. last thing I want to point out is that it's not just big box stores. It's not just portables and the internet. A lot of different people are catching on to allergies, asthma, and the fact that people don't want to get sick. You start looking at Lysol ads or Glade ads. You know, they're coming out with a greener message, but they're starting to talk about not just covering up the air. They're talking about purifying the air. Completely, you know, I'll say a different 180 from where they used to be. So this moves me into induct air purifiers. And with filters, we're dealing with particulate for the most part. With induct air purifiers, we're dealing with the VOCs, the gases, microbials, odors. So I'm going to say almost two different things, but depending on the product, it could change or overlap a little bit. If we talk about specific problems going in, you know, in a building, the first one that comes to mind is sick building syndrome. Now, this is where a person goes to work and they don't feel good. You know, it could be just dizziness, or they can't concentrate, whatever it is. But it becomes a real problem when a lot of people are having these same issues. So they come to work, they feel sick, they leave, and they feel better. Now, I'm not talking about like a Monday morning hangover, that kind of thing. I'm really talking about a problem where consistently they come to work, they don't feel good, they leave, even maybe for lunch, and they feel better. They go home, they feel better. So there's an issue. And I guess what I'm trying to point out is we can take care of some of these issues, but we got to figure out what the issue is. If we go into that building and we find that the copy machine is producing a lot of VOCs, it's producing a lot of ozone, and the people in that work area are affected, we can then fix the problem. We can move the copier. We can move the people. We can bring in fresh air. We can add a purifier. There's a lot of options to fix that problem. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that's not a sick building. That was a copy machine that was creating too many VOCs, making people not feel good. If I go into that same building and I know there's a problem, but I can't find the problem, then we can label it a sick building, and there's options for that. Dirty sock syndrome. This is where you walk into a home or possibly a building, and it smells like a locker room. There's a strong odor. What I can tell you is that 9 times out of 10, the homeowner is going to blame it on mold. Because I got mold somewhere. I know it. I can smell it. What I can tell you is that 9 out of 10 times, it's usually not mold. It's usually bacteria. And to be more specific, it's usually bacteria on the coil. So there's a lot of options to deal with that, but kind of what's happening is that bacteria is eating stuff on the coil. And when I say eating, I mean decomposing. So the coil captures stuff. It's dirty, it's damp, it's dark. Bacteria starts decomposing whatever's on there, and it creates an odor, and that odor is unpleasant. So one of the products I wanted to talk about is RGF. So RGF is a company based out of Florida. So we're dealing with I'll say an American-made product. And RGF stands for Ron G. Fink. And Ron is on his boat in Florida hoping that you sell a lot of these. The one thing about RGF is that they're into a lot of different industries. Now, we recognize them for air treatment, but you know, they deal with wastewater recycling. They deal with a lot of boats and grease, a lot of things we'd never think of. So my point is that this technology is in a lot of places that we don't see. to the point where if you've been on a Disney cruise line, you've been on a cruise ship that has this process in it. If you've had a Coke at Subway, you've had ice that's been through this process. If you've had a Tyson chicken breast, you've had a chicken breast that's been through this process. So it's in a lot of places. We just don't always see it. So UV light. UV light is very good at cleaning a specific object. The problem with UV light is that it doesn't travel very well. Sorry, that's why it took a little longer to load than I wanted it to. So UV light, if you go just 3 inches away from that bulb, you have lost 90% of the power, of the effectiveness. Does that mean it's not working? No. It just means that we need long exposure times to do what it's supposed to do. That's why, it's what I'm saying, it doesn't travel very well. You go, 5 feet away from it, it's really not doing anything. And to say that it's going to kill something that's flying past it at, even 1,000 feet per minute, it's just not going to happen. Here's a picture of a UV light setup if you were going to clean every inch of a coil. And in my lifetime, I don't think that I've ever seen more than 2 shining on a residential coil. All right, so why did I talk about UV lights with the RGF product? It's because this unit has a UV light in it. But the UV light is not designed to clean a coil. It's only there to create a chemical reaction. And the chemical reaction sends out hydroperoxides. We call that process phi for short. So what do those hydroperoxides do? They go out into the space, they clean the air, and they clean the surface. So I said a whole lot of things on this slide, but what I want you to remember is the surface. That's the most important word on this slide. We're not only cleaning the air, we are also cleaning the surface. One of the newest phenomenons in the indoor air quality arena is what we call highly touched objects. This is basically the study of how long nasty things will live on things that we touch all the time. So what are things that we touch all the time? Doorknobs, telephones, keyboards, elevator buttons, railings. So, and if you look at it, C. diff, it only lasts about 5 months. E. coli, only about 16 months. So when you start looking at how long these things can live on an object, kind of makes the hairs on the back of my neck stick up. There's also a lot of studies going on about the sneeze. And the sneeze is interesting because most people are worried about, I'll say, getting sneezed on. If you're in that 1 to 5 feet away from where somebody's sneezing. But when you sneeze, you create droplets. I like to call it wet nastiness, but it's droplets. And the heavy droplets hit the ground relatively quickly. You can say between 1 and 3 feet, maybe 5 feet as a medium range. But sneezes have the ability to travel over 160 feet. That's pretty far. And the problem is with those droplets that travel that far is that they're the small droplets. And they have the ability to carry infectious stuff on them. So if somebody's sick, they sneeze, the sneeze can go very far, and those droplets are so small that they have the ability to get sucked up into the return and get distributed throughout a building or a house. The other problem with the small droplets is that they have the ability to bypass all of the body's defenses systems. So they make their way into the deepest parts of the lungs, and then you get sick. RGF created the sneeze test. So what they did, they put this guy in a box, watch him sneeze, and with the RGF technology, they're able to reduce 78% of that wet nastiness before it reaches 3 feet. So they're able to get rid of most of the infection before it even gets 3 feet away from the person sneezing. Every year, there's a new bug. We've seen H1N1, we've seen bird flu, C. diff. There's a million of them. But every year, there's always some other news story about people getting sick. And it's always, let's say, interesting to watch the hysteria. So if you remember H1N1, this one's kind of fallen out of favor lately. But you can see that RGF technology gets rid of 99% of H1N1. And this is all third-party tested studies. SARS. So this is the one where I call it bird flu. RGF was actually accredited for keeping the kill rate down in China because the government put these in all their transportation hubs and government buildings. Norwalk virus. Now, this is that cruise ship virus. So this is the one where, 1,000 people go out on a ship and 800 come back sick. It's very contagious. The problem with this one is that it is surface-borne. So what does that mean? Basically, if you have an outbreak of Norwalk, how do you get rid of it? Most people take, a rag and some bleach and go try to wipe everything down. Well, the problem is that doesn't really kill Norwalk. It just stirs it up, and it goes and grows somewhere else. It moved from the elevator button to the railing, whatever it is. So RGF is able to kill Norwalk where it sits on the surface, and that's why you're going to see this on all Disney cruise lines, Carnival cruise lines. There's a couple other ones that I can't remember. And the idea there is nobody wants to be the cruise ship that people get sick on. MRSA. MRSA is staph infection. We call it staph infection on steroids. So this is the one where you go in for knee surgery, you get MRSA, and you die. Why do I say you die? Because it's extremely difficult to get rid of. If you have an infection, let's just say a sinus infection, really the only way to get rid of it is to give yourself antibiotics. Well, the problem with MRSA is that it's got that little resistant word in it. So what that means is it doesn't care if you give it antibiotics. So it just continues to grow, and it just becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger problem. So RGF, how does it work? Well, I said we create hydroperoxides. What happens is it collides with some sort of a single-cell living organism, and it oxidizes it. Oxidize basically means we're ripping out the electron or the neutron and changing the state of that virus or bacteria, whatever it is, from something harmful to something that's not harmful. I like to use generic words like killing it, but what we're actually doing is oxidizing the cell. One of the easiest ways to remember it is it's a very weak, I'll say, misting of hydrogen peroxide. So if you can remember, you got a scraped knee as a kid, mom put some hydrogen peroxide on the knee. Why did she do that? Well, to keep it clean, but to get rid of any germs, bacteria, viruses, any nasties that might be growing on your knee. It gets rid of them. It oxidizes them. All right, so here is my grade school drawing of how an RGF system installs. You install it in the plenum above the coil, and you plug it in. In the plenum, it's going to create hydroperoxides. I'm going to call hydroperoxides scrubbing bubbles. Scrubbing bubbles go through the HVAC system and clean the air and also the surface. Here's some quick specifications. The unit we use 9 out of 10 times is the 212GA. It's good for up to 6,500 CFM. So that's, I'll say, any residential system you could run into. Just uses a few watts. It's kind of like a night light, so we're not using a lot of power. The bulb is 9 inches. It lasts 25,000 hours. What does that mean? That means 3 years. So in about 2.5, 3 years, you're going to want to change that thing out because that cell has become ineffective. It may still be glowing blue, but it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. I said 120 volts, but it's either 120 or 220 because it has an automatic switching transformer in it. Some other units, there's the VSF unit, which is smaller. We use that generally for apartments, smaller condos. We have the high output if your load is bigger. Now, what do I mean by load? We're dealing with a 2,000 square foot house, but every Friday there's a poker night in the basement and the house smells like cigars. Well, we're not dealing with an average house, so we may need the high output because the load is more. And then we get into 14-inch cells. A few other units. The first one on the left there is the plug-in. It's good for 1,500 square feet. It's great for, I'll say, musty basements or maybe apartments where the HVAC equipment is not the renters. It's good for 1,500 square feet, but it's only got a small little muffin top fan in there. So the idea that it's going to go through a hallway, into a bedroom, into the bathroom, is probably not going to get there. So it's really good for like wide open spaces, but if it's got to go through a lot of hallways and doors, you might need multiples. The one right below it is what I call the mini, or I like to refer it as the low profile unit. This guy's great for PTACs, fan coils, those kind of applications. Ice machine unit. Now, this guy doesn't get used very often, but I have seen guys do pretty creative things with it. If you look at the bottom of that unit, it's got connectors for 2 hoses. And generally speaking, the unit gets mounted on a wall, and then those 2 hoses go into the back of an ice machine. Keeps the ice free from, green, black gooiness, which we don't want in our ice. But what guys have done is they've taken those 2 hoses, put them into the butcher's case. Now the butcher gets an extra 3 days out of his T-bones because the bacteria is not attacking the dead meat. So it's kind of, give me the bloody one, not the brown one. Give me a few days. One of the newer units from RGF is the REMI. And the REMI stands for Reflective Electromagnetic Energy. What it means, though, is that we have the same exact RGF technology inside of that unit, but we've added ionization. What does that do? Basically, it means that we're able to attract particulate. When I say attract, the particulate attract to each other, and they become bigger. Bigger particulate are easier to capture, so it makes your filter more efficient. One other induct air purifier is the APCO. And in 2011, ASHRAE awarded them the Innovation Award in the IAQ category. This guy uses PCO technology. That stands for photocatalytic oxidation. So if I break that down, photo, in this case, stands for a UV light. The catalyst is titanium dioxide. I'm going to call that the active ingredient. And then oxidation means that we are killing bad stuff in the air. So photocatalytic oxidation, or light, titanium dioxide, killing stuff. So how does this guy work? First, it has a UV light. So UV lights do a great job at keeping the coil clean. Based on that, we're getting rid of nastiness on the coil, so that coil doesn't look like a shag carpet. And then there's a slight energy story by keeping the coil clean. You know, airflow is moving easier, the blower and the motor are not working as hard. Go about it that way. The other thing that UV light does, outside of cleaning the coil, is that it regenerates carbon. So if you've ever used carbon in the past to get rid of odors, the problem with it is that it gets used up and it has to be replaced or cleaned. UV light regenerates carbon. So I'm trying to read some of the questions. So the second thing, we have a UV light. UV light cleans the coil, regenerates the carbon. The carbon does a great job at getting rid of odors. We've used it for years. The beauty about this one is that the carbon never has to be replaced because the UV light regenerates it. This is talking about all the stuff that carbon captures and gets rid of, but I'm running short on time, so I'm not going to dive into that. The third thing is that carbon, I'll call it the carbon matrix on the APCO product, is infused with titanium dioxide. Now, titanium dioxide is what I'm going to call the active ingredient in PCO. So the UV light hits that titanium dioxide. It's going to create radicals, and those radicals are therefore going to get rid of VOCs and contaminants. If we talk about this unit, very similar to the RGF, 115, 120 volt, you plug it in. We're dealing with a 15-inch lamp. This lamp lasts 2 years and then has to be replaced. It's good for up to 7.5 tons. We want it to run all the time, and it also gets mounted in the plenum above the coil. The beautiful thing is that it has a lifetime warranty. So how can you have a lifetime warranty with something that has to be replaced every 2 years? Well, the power supply in the ballast has a lifetime warranty, and the bulb has a lifetime warranty provided you change it out every 2 years. So if you have a bulb that's 1 year old and goes out, we'll give you a new one. A few different options or flavors on the APCO units. There's a magnet, so you don't even have to cut a hole. You just stick it in there, and it's a 50-pound magnet, so it actually takes a little bit of leverage to pull it off. So it's not going to be going anywhere. You get power to it. Great for certain applications. And then there's the RT, which stands for remote tether. This guy is a smaller bulb and a smaller head, so it's able to fit in a lot of tight spaces. So a lot of different options on the APCO unit. The last induct air purifier I'm going to talk about is made by GPS. Stands for Global Plasma Solutions. So what does this guy do? This guy gets rid of mold, viruses, bacteria, but the one thing I want you to take a look at is that it reduces static electricity. So I know we're talking residential here, but anywhere where they're manufacturing circuit boards or working with paper or have IT rooms, anywhere where static electricity is an issue, this is a great product for getting rid of static electricity. All right, so it does all that great stuff. Gets rid of VOCs, gets rid of odors, helps with static electricity. Basically what we're doing is we're taking a unfriendly gas and turning it into a friendly gas. Friendly would be things like nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water vapor, things that we breathe pretty much every day. The nice thing about this is that it's small, so it will fit into any system. It comes in 3 different flavors, 24 volts, 115, or 208. Those are 3 separate units. The one we recommend is the 2400, and that is good for up to 2400 CFM. So I'll say almost any residential system. It's extremely small, which allows it to fit just about anywhere. So you can see fan coils and duct-free splits, which are great, but you think about it, it will fit into any furnace or heat pump application out there. The nice thing about GPS is that you never have to replace anything. There's no bulbs, there's no tubes, there's no cells, so you never have to come back and maintain it. So expensive, long-term care, it's really not an option with this one. You just install it once and it's good to go. And because I'll say one size pretty much fits all with the 2400 CFM rating, you can put one on your truck and it's you've always got it there. Now the install is different than the other IAQ products we talked about. This guy's going to install in the return on the blower housing. So here's a picture of it. So it's one screw on the blower housing. Keep the screw small, and then you get power to it. And again, power is either 24 volt, 115, or 220. So what is this guy doing that the other ones are not? We're not creating a chemical reaction like RGF. We don't have a UV light like the APCO. What we're doing here is creating bipolar ionization. So we're sending out ions that are either positively charged or negatively charged, or I should say both. And because we're able to get rid of gases, and I'll say break down gases, we are able to get rid of odors. I go back to earlier speech, most gases we can smell. Here's a list of what I'll say chemical compounds that GPS can easily get rid of. There's 2 here I want you to focus in on. Excuse me. Third from the bottom is formaldehyde. Now, formaldehyde, again, is the poster child of VOCs. This is the one we find everywhere. This is the one that causes a lot of problems, and GPS can easily get rid of that. If you go 4th from the top, you see ammonia. And I only bring that one on because people generally know the smell of ammonia, and they know that long-term exposure to ammonia causes bad things. So those are some gases that GPS can easily get rid of. Okay, rotavirus. Now, this is one where if you've ever had a kid with norovirus or rotavirus, you know it. And you know it because you are changing diapers nonstop. And I'm talking like every 10 minutes. That's bad news. I bring this up because GPS does a great job at getting rid of those 2 viruses that generally go after children. E. coli. So this is the one where we call it food poisoning. So, excuse me, if you've ever had a 24-hour stomach flu, that kind of thing, it's generally E. coli. Comes in a lot of different forms, but GPS does a great job at killing E. coli. TB stands for tuberculosis. This guy is a bacteria and tends to go after weakened immune systems. You'll see outbreaks in certain areas, but GPS does a good job at controlling tuberculosis outbreaks. C. diff. This is the one where you just feel really sick. And the problem with C. diff is that a lot of times you'll go into a hospital to have them look at something else, and you'll walk away with C. diff because it's very easily ingested. And this is a severe, I don't want to call it a cold, but you feel very sick for a long time. Like a week in the hospital is pretty standard for C. diff. Here's a air advice test on a office building. So as you can see, VOCs are relatively high, going off the charts. Right where the red circle is where a GPS unit was installed. This is a week later. So if the first one was the before, this one is the after. And you can see that it took VOC levels down to an acceptable range. This is a testimonial, and this was a homeless shelter. And the problem was the homeless shelter had a smell. They were dealing with a lot of people. There was a lot of odors. GPS did a great job at getting rid of the odors. This one here is a retirement community. They had a problem room, and they were getting to the point where they were going to change out everything. I'm talking carpets, drapes, paint it, get rid of, throw everything away. And what they decided to do was, hey, we'll give this GPS thing a try. As you can see, 1 day later, the odor was dramatically reduced. 2 days later, there was no odor. So a couple great testimonials on the GPS product. And if you have any questions, here's my contact information. I really appreciate your time, and don't hesitate to give me a call. Thanks so much.